The following review may contain spoilers. John Lewis' Good Trouble is a new documentary available for rent on most streaming platforms. The subject matter itself pretty much automatically makes this documentary engaging and watchable. Congressman John Lewis is a true American hero who is willing to sacrifice his life to fight for equality for his fellow citizens. When the documentary gets into historical footage, it's extremely moving and effective. There's the famous incident when he was 25 years old and tried to cross the bridge at Selma to protest for voting rights for African Americans. Through old photographs and film footage, we see the police charge the peaceful protesters. Lewis gets hit in the head with a nightstick and gets a fractured skull. He said he felt his knees go out and thought he would die at that moment. A second moment in the documentary is when he was beaten by the police in South Carolina for participating in the Freedom Rider protests. There is also a gut-wrenching and infuriating archival footage portion of the sit-ins at racist restaurants that refuse to serve black customers. It's in these moments that the documentary truly excels. Like any documentary about great men or women, you are inspired as an audience member. This man was willing to sacrifice his life for the greater good. What have I done with my life? Any documentary like this should leave you with that feeling, introspectively questioning your contribution to society. There are 3 amazing quotes from Lewis during the film. At one point, his longtime receptionist shares a Lewis quote, "Don't get lost in a sea of despair." Quite profound words for a man who could have easily given up, and justifiably so, at any time in his civil rights and activism career. Another is told by Minnesota Representative Ilhan Omar, where Lewis says in reference to his beating in Selma, he was willing to get a concussion so that the conscience of the country could be awakened. After Lewis's beating by the hands of the police at the South Carolina Freedom Riders protest, he implies that since he was beaten and jailed so many times, that he no longer felt fear. He states that it is after you no longer feel fear that you are truly free. Strong words to live by for anyone who is fighting forces of oppression. Unfortunately, this documentary decides to be less of a work of journalism and more of a hagiography. The best example of this would be how they kind of quickly gloss over a controversial part of John Lewis's life. During his second run for Congress, and oddly, the film does not touch on his congressional runs until 1 hour and 18 minutes into a 1 hour and 37-minute movie, he happened to run against a friend and fellow civil rights leader, the late Julian Bond. At one point in the election, Lewis challenges Bond to a drug test to take advantage of alleged cocaine use stories linked to Bond. Clearly, Lewis was going for the jugular here, in spite of the friendship between the two men. But the documentary doesn't interview Lewis directly about this much, and barely gives any response from Bond or his family other than a small snippet of archival footage where Bond states that he might not continue his friendship with Lewis in the future. The film leaves this part of Lewis's life at that, and oddly doesn't even mention that they reconciled as friends only 3 years later. But the fact that the director just quickly glossed over this just tells the audience that the documentary leaves a lot of information on the cutting room floor. Another really poorly directed segment of the film was when they go through all of John Lewis's landmark legislative work. Instead of going in depth through any of it, it's reduced to a musical montage with titles of the bills appearing on screen, and it's set to Stevie Wonder's Higher Ground. This moment was completely frustrating as a viewer. I felt like I was watching one of those news clips for kids type videos, like a watered down version of political news for younger people to digest more easily. And I wanted to know more about the legislative work. He is a legendary congressman after all. I wanted to know more about his legacy and the impact he had on our country. But it doesn't do it. It just glosses over it again through a musical montage, and it's really a poor choice. Another odd choice by the filmmakers was to focus a lot of the screen time on John Lewis's personality outside of his work. A smattering of this would have been fine, but a person who has this much legacy, I wanted the documentary to focus more on his professional work. But there were multiple scenes of his love for chickens. There's an extended scene of a humorous moment when a video of him dancing to Pharrell's Happy is posted on social media. It's fun to get to know another side of Lewis, but I felt like these scenes should have been shorter and there should have been more focus on his impactful work and career. My final rating for John Lewis Good Trouble is 2 stars. As of the making of this video, the Rotten Tomatoes percentage for John Lewis Good Trouble is 95%. I completely understand recommending this film for its historical importance and significance, but it just left me wanting more, so I can't agree with the critics here. A documentary about John Lewis is an opportunity to create something for the historical archives that may be of importance for generations. The filmmakers here did not see that as their end goal, and I for one would not mind seeing a more thorough and detailed documentary of this great man and true American hero at some point in the near future.